Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host today, Amanda Wilkie, a consultant here at Boomer Consulting, and with me is Riki Shah. Hi, Riki. Thank you so much for being on this episode of the Boomer Briefing Podcast.
Hey, Amanda, good seeing you. Thanks for having me and excited to have this discussion today.
Me too, Riki. And I know you're a tax principal at CDH. And today we're going to talk about something that a lot of firms are really focused on right now, and that's navigating the struggles with an outsourcing strategy. And I know that your firm is doing a lot with outsourcing and offshoring, and we'll get into that in a minute. But first, Riki, if you don't mind, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your role within the firm.
Yeah, I'm a partner at CDH. I've been with the firm since 2011, so for the last 13 years. I had the tax department, and one of my goals a few years ago was to figure out our labor problem. But really, my role in the firm is from a tax-oriented tax perspective standpoint.
Okay, awesome. And again, today we're going to talk about some outsourcing. And I know when we spoke previously, you asked a great question when I mentioned outsourcing. You asked me, are we talking about outsourcing or offshoring? And I think those are words that many people in the profession use interchangeably. But I think it's important to differentiate those because it really impacts the strategy that the firm has. So if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about maybe the two of those and how your firm kind of leverages them differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. Outsourcing and offshoring, in my opinion, are very different. With outsourcing, in my opinion, it's really using a vendor that has their own processes, systems, and their goal is to get you a product at the end of the day. And offshoring, I think it's significantly different. It's really an extension of your existing team. You've got team members that are really just your team members, and they're there to use your systems, your processes, and give you a product that would be no different if it was done in your own office. And it's really important to figure out which direction you want or both. I know at our firm we use both models for a variety of different reasons. We have our outsourced team, which we've had for, I want to say, over 10 years now, and we outsource work for such as bookkeeping tasks, day-to-day entry, data entry, QuickBooks, things like that. And our offshore team is something we started more recently. That's only been, I want to say, close to 3 years now, and it's been a different experience with offshore compared to the outsourcing. Offshore is very much, it requires training, requires effort on our end as well too, to make that happen.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So would you say that's the biggest difference is when they are an extension of your team, you're still treating them as part of your team, and that means extending those processes, extending the training, and all of the things that go with extending your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Our processes when we hire someone that's part of our offshore team is no different than hiring somebody local. So they go through the same type of training. They get a supervisor here they work with. They get the same tools. The only difference that we have is we're just more cautious from a security standpoint on what type of information they can immediately see and what they cannot. So one of the things we try to be careful is of the IRS 7216 disclosure, where unless there's an explicit consent from the taxpayer, the data does not end up outside of our office. So that's one thing we're cautious of. But other than that, they have the same software suite. They use Teams with us, which is our go-to device for making phone calls and messaging each other, and they feel like no different than anybody else in our office.
Gotcha. So that's your offshore resources. So outsourcing, though, you send things out, and you're just waiting to basically get something back from that team. Is that right?
Yeah, so we use a couple of vendors for outsourcing in Asia, and typically they've got set things that they do repetitively over and over. They don't necessarily use our processes, our work papers per se, but they give us a product of what we need. They may get there in a little different pattern. They may utilize a little different resources. They may set up their product a little differently, but at the end of the day, our supervision is different between the two, where we're not supervising as much on the outsource side. They've established their resources. They have internal resources. They can plug and place somebody in a role and say, this is what we're looking for, and they'll do it their own way. But we'll get something that's usable for us at the end of the day.
Gotcha. Yeah, so two totally different things, the outsourcing and the offshoring, but both are really supplementing your staff and their capacity. So let's talk about the why. Why firms would do either one of these things. Why did your firm decide to leverage these resources?
Yeah, so I'll start with the outsourcing. With the outsourcing. It's been interesting because as our firm grows, there's some tasks that our team just didn't want to work on, and in order for us to keep our employees happy with what they're doing, we have to make them excited, engaged for what they want to do. And there's some tasks that are just not for them to do. They're not interested in doing them. But we know as a firm, we still have a need for that because our clients need it. And I think our team members enjoy that instead of them doing the data entry, they're doing more of the analytics. They're talking to the client more, which is what we want them to do and build that relationship. So that was one of our needs on the outsource side. And the offshore was a bit different. Offshore really started coming out of COVID. And I'm sure and everyone else knows that there's been a labor shortage the last few years in the profession. And in our firm, the tax department got hit the hardest coming out of COVID, where we were struggling with recruiting. And part of me just didn't feel good of giving people more hours to work on. And I was very worried about burning team members out coming out of COVID. Tax deadlines changed a bit in 2020 and 2021, which wasn't easy. And that caused rippling effects on our department because everything got shifted back. And at that point, we were doing PPP work, employee retention credit work. I mean, these extra items were just popping up, and they were great for the firm, but they weren't so great for our team members because they're so bogged down with just their normal responsibilities. So we said, hey, let's look at offshoring some of the work that we do. And it was really to complement our internal team members more than anything. It was a sigh of relief when we were able to find offshore team members that come in and say, hey, we'll take this off your plate. Just show us how to do it. And they were excited to pick it up. Our team members were growing with it. We started with thinking about one of my team members who's a senior. She started right at the heart of COVID in June of 2020, and she's now 4 years along. And I think that she's grown quicker more than ever because she's put in a spot where she's come in and saying, hey, I'm going to start reviewing some of the stuff that the offshore team members prepare. And that I think is better growth, helps her with talking to clients more too. So I think it's also expedited our growth within the department, having that complementary services of having offshore. And the cool thing is that our managers loved it too, because what they're doing today is more getting the data in the door, corresponding with clients more, not worrying so much about the little details. And by the time they get something back, they're happy with it. And the best part is they're part of your team. So if you want to call them and say, hey, look, I want to go over this concept with you, they're able to do it very quickly, efficiently, and it doesn't matter where they're located. We've got people in our Chicago office, and our main headquarters is right by O'Hare Airport. But it's no different than calling somebody in Chicago or calling someone overseas. It's the same concept. And some of the challenges that we see is like the time difference, right? So they work. We predominantly see them during our work hours half the day. So we're very, very cautious in saying, hey, if we need something with our offshore team and want to cross time with them, we do it in the beginning part of our day as much as we can.
Yeah. And I love the way that you put that, Ricky, that they complement your staff. They complement everyone else in your firm. And we've been talking for the last few years about how the profession is changing. And it's no longer, a pyramid structure within the firm where you've got a lot of people at the bottom doing a lot of those just menial tasks, but it's turning more into that diamond where you're elevating people, you're outsourcing or you're automating, some of those tasks, and you're elevating people, faster. And I think that's great. I think that CDH is a firm that is actually doing those things. That's a great example of how the profession is changing and how your firm is really taking advantage of that. And what an incredible competitive advantage for recruiting when you're telling people that they are quickly going to be tackling some more of those advanced tasks and really developing more of those advanced skills. I think that's great for you and for your firm.
Yeah, and one thing to also add to that, I think it enhances client experience, which to me is extremely important on when you work with clients. I think some of the benefits we've seen is quicker turnaround time on projects. And last season, this is just an example. I had um, a small 1040 that we do, and the client gave us documents on Monday. It went to an offshore labor on Tuesday, and the return came back and went out the door on Wednesday. I'd never in my career had a 72-hour turnaround on something like that. And my client was just, surprised. They're like, "You're sure it's done?" I'm like, "Yeah, I looked at it, reviewed it, and signed it. It's coming to you electronically for signature." And I mean, that's beating your client's expectations, beyond anything. And I mean, I find a lot of enjoyment in knowing that clients are very happy with that too.
Yeah, I bet they were. I bet they were surprised because we're not known as a profession that does things that quickly. But yeah, what a great benefit for your clients of turning things around, a bit faster. So you mentioned earlier that you actually use multiple sources like outsource and offshoring resources. What kind of tasks are you leveraging these resources for?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So when we started with offshoring, our number one goal was to use it for tax purposes. And we were very, very cautious because we wanted to make sure we're not breaking any rules with the IRS. We're very secure. Um, and we also wanted to make sure that any data going to them is held securely. So one of the things that we did is our due diligence in selecting a vendor to use. We wanted to make sure they're very secure. From what I understand, our offshore team does not even keep a mobile device next to them as they're working, so there's no data being lost. They are in a remote desktop environment connecting to us, so we know that if there was ever a need, we can take that switch and turn it off very quickly. But we do work with different vendors. We do work with one offshore vendor and about two different outsource vendors. And we chose those strategically depending on what they were good at. And that was really important to us because we wanted to know what's their bread and butter, what do they like that likes, for their team members, and how do we work with them simultaneously at the same time that we're getting the best bang for our buck and the biggest benefit for it as well too. So we work with two vendors with offshoring, and I believe they both do two different things for us. We've got one that does more of the data entry. We've got another one that manages a group of clients for us. And our offshoring team has now just come in, so we're learning with that. Our audit practice is starting to utilize them from audits now as well too. But we started more on the tax side because that's where our biggest need was when we needed them.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's no, one size fits all. Just like you select technology for what it does best, you're selecting these vendors for what they really do best and excel at as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions we asked our offshoring vendor is, are we the right fit for you? And that was important to me. I didn't want to go into or sign a contract with someone saying, "Hey, we're really not your right fit. We're not the right firm size." And um, you know, back then we were just really filling up a need and saying we have a need and we want to work with you. But we did some of our due diligence, um, up front and saying, "Hey, what kind of firms do you work with? How many team members do they have? How many team members do you have?" And the other thing that was really important to me is, where do your team members work? What type of conditions do they work in? We wanted to make sure they're safe, they're secure, they're in a spot where they have an enjoyable work experience, a place where they're valued as well too. And we wanted to make sure that our culture lined up with theirs from a long-term standpoint, because we weren't just selecting someone for today. Our goal is to select someone that's going to be a partner with us for a very long time.
Yep, that's very important. So, Ricky, my last question for you is, what do you wish you would have known before you went down this path?
Man, that's a very good question. I actually gave that some thought here. I think having standard operating procedures would have been fantastic. And our firm is not very large. We're about 100 people today, so I still think we're a small to mid-sized firm in the Chicago area. And sometimes not everything is perfectly documented. As you grow in the profession, sometimes you document a little less because, like, oh, I know this already, I don't have to document it. But it makes it more challenging on newer team members because they need everything in a fact where they can learn from it and they can follow the same process in a variety of different manners, so they can pick that up quicker. And I think one of the things that we're now starting to do is we're documenting exactly how things work when you're preparing a return. And we have some of that already done, but documenting it further where it's very crystal clear that when someone starts something, here are the steps you got to take to do it. And I think we're trying to establish that more, going forward. The other thing is, like I mentioned earlier, is leveraging the time zones. Knowing that when they're working, when they're not. A lot of the offshoring is an overseas vendor, so are we making sure that when we're sending things, when we're going to get them back, are we planning their days out correctly? So we're paying very close attention to them now, where we're working with them weekly and saying, here's the weekly schedule, here's what we want you to accomplish, here's your weekly goals. And the other thing is making sure that the firm has everyone around them buying into the concept. I think a few years ago, I think our confidence wasn't as high. We had some team members that were fully bought into it. Others just saying, I'm a little hesitant in what I do and how I operate. But I knew this is something we had to do, just with the number of people that we had. We needed to add more firepower in what we did. And I think coming out 2 to 3 years now, I think we've had literally everybody saying this was such a great idea to do, and people are buying in more and more. And as team members learn, we also want to create a path for the offshore team members. And there's two things that we're trying to work on today, that we didn't think of about a few years ago, is creating some sort of path for offshore team members where they can grow. We want to do promotions within our offshore team members. We want to have goals for them to start reviewing projects as well too. And at some point, when we have team members that have been with us for a long time, we also want to invite them to our office for like a tax season work side by side for those 8 to 12 weeks that are super busy. And we want to do that because we want them to stay with us. We want them to be happy with us. And we want to treat them just like an employee that would be onshore.
Yeah, that's awesome. They are an extension of your team. They're part of your team, no matter if they're in Chicago or on the other side of the globe. So, well, Riki, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. It's great to hear your insights on this topic. So thank you for being here. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, we do release new episodes every Tuesday morning. And today we talked about outsourcing and offshoring and some related to some of the processes and the strategy. But we also cover topics on things like leadership, talent growth, and technology. And what these topics all have in common is that they are critical to your firm's success and helping you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. So if you like what you heard, please subscribe. And again, thank you so much for listening. Thanks again, Riki.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. Appreciate it.